thing that is an interesting concept that we started discussing when this panel came to be is, what is it like to try to start a Bitcoin company in the current legal structure, right? There are a lot of challenges involved. So what we want to focus on today are some of the challenges that these individuals have come across and maybe plan for future ones of what it is like to start a company in the space when Bitcoin technology is still very new. The government and compliance has no idea what to do with it, right? So how does that sort of work out for individuals trying to start companies? So to get things started, I wanted for each person, if you guys don't mind, to run through, give a quick introduction, who you're with, what you're focused on, and then we'll get started into the topic specifically.
Awesome, thank you, Justine. I am Desiree Dickerson, and I am the CEO of Thunder Games. And we build mobile games that are focused on bringing Bitcoin to the world. So I'm not a lawyer, but I have definitely experienced the bad side of the legal stuff, so that's kind of the perspective I'm bringing.
My name is Zack Shapiro. I am a lawyer. I'm the founder and managing partner of Reigns LP, which is a law firm focused on helping startups, especially in the Bitcoin space, get formed, get funding, meet all of the regulatory, corporate, and business challenges that they have along the way towards making the world a better place and huge, multi-billion-dollar exits.
Watch everybody, my name's Hus, I'm the CTO of Novo, we're a crypto-native neobank. I guess in the last 6 years, this is my 4th startup. I've faced off as a technologist to regulators in 3 different regions, Central Asia, Southeast Asia and Europe, obtaining e-money licenses, mobile money licenses, and recently crypto asset licenses as well.
Well, to get things kicked off, I added Des very last minute, and I think she's still a little upset with me, but I think that she has a great example of what companies have to go through trying to start a Bitcoin company, and something that she had shared with me. And that's being unbanked, right? As individuals, maybe some of us have experienced that as well, but what is that like as a company? Des, do you mind sharing your experience?
Yeah, I mean, it sucks. That's the worst. So, Thunder was founded in 2019, actually, by my co-founder, Jack Everett. We're UK-based, but have a US subsidiary. But I came on board late last year, and we raised some money, which was great. We were banked in the UK, and we had a US bank as well. Been operating most of our UK bank he'd been using for the 2 years prior. Everything was great, signed up to all the ad networks, and everything was moving. Then we raised money, and unfortunately, we were debanked the minute those funds were sent, and all of the funds were sent back to our investors. And for 2 months, we had to apply to new banks. We applied to 60 new banks. It took 2 months, so luckily we were super small and just 4 people at the time, so we kind of all could afford to not be paid for 2 months, which really sucked, but it was just an absolute logistical nightmare. So now also, because we're kind of so skittish, we have so many bank accounts just to ensure that we're banked. And it's been an absolute nightmare. It was 2 pure months that we couldn't actually focus on building and pushing out product because we're all sacrificing our firstborns, social security numbers, passports, weird European numbers. I have no idea. Literally signing with blood. But thankfully there were a couple of banks who really sat down with us and worked, to understand the business and to bring us on board. But again, it's just, when you're starting out, nobody knows where to go, and you never know if this is going to happen. And we were really alone, so it was a nightmare.
That's terrible. And Zach, I was curious, you help individuals and businesses with things like this, right? What are some of the main hurdles or challenges that you sort of come across? And is there a solution? And I know that's a huge question, but almost what are you guiding? How are you guiding these individuals?
Sure, so maybe it's helpful to talk about the first types of conversations that I would have with someone who wants to start a Bitcoin company. Thankfully, unlike with some of my other clients, I don't have to start with a long explanation of how we test and how Garrett Hansler is going to come and find them. But there are a lot of questions that you need to ask if you're starting any sort of company. The first, I think really important question is who's going to be on your team. And so one of the first difficult conversations I often have with founders is around splitting equity between co-founders and who do you want to bring on and how do you sort of protect your interests in the company. That starts with forming a legal entity, usually a Delaware C Corp, figuring out who owns the company and owns on what terms, right? And so if you've never heard of a vesting schedule, if you don't know about doing an 83B election, those are the types of things that as a founder you start with at the basics. The next important conversation is where is the money coming from, right? So in some cases, you might be in a position to self-fund your company. A lot of times you might want to raise money, but raising money can look like a lot of different things. If you sign up for a traditional institutional venture capital, that really sets your company on a specific trajectory. You need to really understand those funds and what their incentives are. And most VC funds are really looking for huge, outsized wins, right? They really, really care about the 100x or the 1000x or the 10,000x. They're not so excited for you to do a 2 or 3x on your investment. And so if you sign up to take on that type of money, you're sort of implicitly saying that, all right, we're going to literally go big or go home, and we're betting the company on creating something huge that is going to be a big return for the limited partners in that fund. Whereas if you raise from sort of smaller angel investors who are willing to sort of fund a business that's maybe profitable right out of the gate, but is not going to grow into a huge public company worth billions of dollars, that's a totally other valid strategy for starting and funding and running a company. But it's a different set of priorities for you as a founder. So the initial challenges are really about just what is it you want to do here? How do we best set you up legally to make that happen? And then we get into the tough regulatory hurdles around banking, money transmitter license, and all the fun stuff that Bitcoin companies in particular have to face.
Wonderful. And one of the things that came up, Zach actually mentioned when we were discussing this conference is kind of unique because there are a lot of founders here, right? There are a lot of people starting companies in this space, so I thought it would be really beneficial to sort of hear the stories from those who have done so and what lessons they've learned. And so I was wondering if you could jump in. When this first came up in our email thread, we said I could talk about this for hours. So I'm curious, over this time that you spent in this space, what are your biggest takeaways? What are your biggest learning lessons? And what advice would you give to those trying to start out?
Yeah, I think Zach is right to say people are really important. So number one thing for any startup is finding the right people, and to extend that to compliance, it's really important. So you need to find people who understand your jurisdiction extremely well and who are going to defend your business, like really understand your flows, your commercial operations, tell you what you can and can't do or where the risks are and when you should take those risks, because it really is about risk management. And the appetite that you have for it and the appetite that your jurisdictional regulator has for it. One of the things I'd say which is important is to imagine that you are going to get regulated at some point. If you think you're not, in 3 or 4 or 5 years' time your business will crash into a regulator. Almost guarantee it. Whatever you think you're doing, however self-custodial or non-custodial you think your business is. I, as an investor, would be really worried about investing in you if you're not planning to be regulated, even if you're not going to get regulated. There should be a plan there. And what does that really mean? It's your business and commercial operations, understanding them inside out. The source of funds from investors is important, but so is the source of funds from your commercial operations. Who are your customers? Where do they come from? What is the market segment? How are you going to deal with them? Those are all things that you really need to understand. And as a technologist, you also need to understand that you can't let your CEO worry about this. You need to be involved in informing their decisions at every step of this. Now, the one caveat I would put here is that you have to deliver your product into the hands of your customers. That's the number one thing you should be thinking about. And if compliance, the wrong kind of compliance officer is the one that takes away from that goal. If they're telling you constantly you can't do this, you don't do this, that's the wrong person. And you typically find these people from traditional financial sector moving into crypto or fintech. So you're looking for someone that's going to help deliver your product one way or another without breaking the law and within a risk parameters that you as an organization have set, essentially.
I just want to chime in there. I think it's just like all of these regulations and make a product that you can put out there is just insane. I mean, we're doing like cash outs to Cash App in our games now, but we had to like totally build a part of the product for users in New York because they can't actually, because of like the New York laws, like we've actually had to customize our product around these regulations, and it's just like absolutely insane making sure people get the right pop-ups or like the notifications in the right languages. And it's like, we're global, so we have to like abide by all the rules everywhere. And it's a huge nightmare when building products.
Absolutely nailed it. If I can jump in, this is one of the things that we did for Noah. We feature flag everything in the app down to the precision of a single feature for a single user. And if you don't do that day one, unfortunately, you're going to have to go in and re-engineer your app, which is an absolute nightmare. So, one takeaway as a technologist, you should be telling your CEO, we need to feature flag everything day one.
Yeah, just to get a sense of how insane some of these regulations are, as a resident of the great state of New York, I can use Cash App. I can use Cash App with Bitcoin, but I cannot use Cash App with the Lightning Network because, the Lightning Network is too dangerous for New Yorkers. I want to echo something else who said, though, one of the really important skills as a founder if you're starting a company is to learn how to manage lawyers. That starts with picking the right lawyer, and I think oftentimes for founders what that means, the questions you want to ask. Does the lawyer I'm hiring have experience with the type of thing that I'm doing? Whether that's raising venture rounds, whether that's dealing with the technology that I'm building, whether it's, if it's a really IP-heavy business, whether it's familiar with IP. Does my lawyer understand the correct risk tolerance that I have? A lot of startups, I think, make the mistake of going to huge firms, that really do their best work advising Fortune 500 companies. And I can tell you the right answer for a Fortune 500 company as regards risk is going to be incredibly different than a pre-seed startup, and a lawyer that treats those both the same is going to be a real disservice to the founder. And then the third is, does your lawyer have a business sense? And I think this is maybe the most underrated one. I feel very strongly that legal advice is an input in most cases to business decision making. And there are some times where I have to go to clients and say, look, this is a bright line, we really can't do this because you'll go to prison, and so let's not. That is really rare. That is absolutely the exception, not the rule. And so, when I'm otherwise giving legal advice, when there's gray area, I try and help clients understand, here's how I would think about it in your shoes. Here's what I can tell you about the law. Here's how to try and make this legal advice actionable. But at the end of the day, I'm here to be a support tool to help you make the right decisions, to move your company forward and navigate these regulations and problem solve, not just to throw up, extra hurdles and be the no guy.
It seems very much like a balancing act, just like you mentioned in New York, you can't cash up with the Lightning Network. It's almost like regulatory, I can't speak, our lawmakers don't understand it, but they're regulating it, right? And so it seems like it's just constantly changing. They don't know what to do with it. And one thing that came up backstage, other than Rihanna's fluffy pup, was the fact that the crypto couple was talking about TikTok and how they'll get shadow banned if they mention Bitcoin. And you and I were having a conversation about just trying to get an app in the App Store, right? Like there's a very unwelcoming culture right now against Bitcoin when it comes to marketing, getting things included in different places that actually allows you to get access to your users, right? To put the product in your users' hands. So I'm curious, some experiences that you've had with that. Maybe Desiree, you can start, because I'd really love to hear your take on this as well.
Yeah, the App Store, Google Play, wow, damn. That is just a dance that you have to learn how to fight. I mean, it's just wild. They are very, very anti-Bitcoin, and especially like anything with Bitcoin and gaming is just a huge red flag. So, that's something my co-founder has spent years on. I mean, he's been building apps for the App Store since the App Store came out. But then that's like information that we just share. Like, when we get rejected from the App Store, for instance, we've had a game in the store for 2 years with the same icon, and they just took our game out of the App Store, and they said, your icon violates rules. And we're like, but it's been in there for 2 years. So it's basically you just have to literally do whatever they tell you at any point in time. Their rules are always changing, so you just always have to be on your toes. Like we share a lot of our strategies with Zebedee and like other folks who are kind of getting into the space, but it's just like a never-ending battle in how you introduce Bitcoin, what you say about Bitcoin, and then that's not to mention the ad networks, like how we make a decent amount of our revenue. A lot of the ad networks just block Bitcoin in general. So I spent probably 2 weeks probably sending 200 and 300 emails or messages on LinkedIn to just get in front of these people, and we had 12 ad networks to start accepting Bitcoin companies, because I just sat them down, but I had to literally teach them about Bitcoin. I had to teach them about Lightning, and it's spent hours upon hours of time. I mean, it's worth it because we have the revenue, but it's just one more resistance point that we have to work to climb over.
Song and dance. You're required to pretty much just dance to tune.
Exactly.
So what are some of your experiences, whether it be in trying to market your product or trying to reach your users, that you had to sort of jump through?
So you might find this a little bit surprising, but one of the constraints that we imposed on ourselves day one at Nova was to not spend a single penny on marketing or actively solicit for customers. That was precisely to avoid any kind of regulatory breach. Now we're applying for licenses, and when we get those licenses, we will be able to actively solicit for marketing. But I think my advice would be use your branding and your core values and use your community. Tell people what you're doing, but don't ask them to buy anything from you, right? Just explain to people what you're doing and why you're doing it, and allow your community to do your marketing for you, essentially. Like I said, we don't spend a penny on marketing. We've got 250,000 people on our wait list and 1,500 beta users right now. And one of the reasons why we're here at TABConf, there's two reasons. One is to hire, but the other one is to recruit beta users into the program to help us build the app. And our community spreads the word. That keeps us kind of out of the regulators' reach for the time being until we obtain our licenses.
Smart way to do it. Zach, curious what your thoughts are on the current landscape around sort of compliance. I'm sure you have a lot to say on that, so maybe we'll try to wrap it up. And also sort of just thoughts on, do you see that this will be changing in the next few years? Do you think this is going to be an uphill battle for a while for Bitcoin companies? I would really just kind of like to hear your thoughts, because it sounds like you're coming across, you get to deal with a lot of different individuals and businesses, so you see a very large variety of what they're having to deal with. So curious your thoughts.
Sure. I would say the first thing is that compared to all of the other crypto assets out there, there are just way fewer regulatory hurdles for Bitcoin companies to start with. So that's the good news. Bitcoin, I think, is the only digital asset that the SEC has made very clear they think is a commodity. That's really super helpful. Commodity spot markets are just much less regulated than other markets. And so handling Bitcoin is not as difficult as handling some of this other stuff, especially around fundraising. The biggest regulatory hurdles that Bitcoin companies specifically face, I'd say number one on my wish list of things to change is the money service businesses / money transmitter laws. Those are just, any way you slice it, huge pain in the ass, expensive to comply with, going state by state and getting licenses. My number one, so I do some work with the Bitcoin Policy Institute, my number one thing that I would like to lobby for is to have a federal money transmitter law, if we're going to have money transmitter laws. So we know what the rule is, and there's one rule to follow, and you don't have to do this incredible song and dance. A related issue that Bitcoin companies face is around KYC, AML. And those are tricky conversations sometimes with Bitcoin companies, right? Because that is an area where there are criminal penalties for not living up to your obligations. The obligations are not always 100% clear. And being the most conservative in terms of compliance really does sometimes run in the face of some of the values of the Bitcoin community. And so that, I think, is sort of the most delicate area to balance. And I think going forward, that is where I'm sure that the regulations will change. They are constantly changing. The government really doesn't understand this technology yet at all. And they'll get more sophisticated and the laws will change, but that's the area where I'm sort of most closely watching for Bitcoin companies, how they can stay compliant and still have the sort of decentralized, trustless ethos that we're all.
I think an interesting thing that I struggle with personally as a Bitcoiner and someone who believes in individual freedom and self-sovereignty is that, I shouldn't say this because it's recorded, I hate the AML really hard time anytime I have to do training for it. I'm cursing internally, and it triggers every part of me. But, you know, being a business, licensed in the US, these are things that we have to deal with. And I think it's an interesting concept to think about Bitcoin as freedom money, and you don't need any sort of third party to access it. You can do peer-to-peer. But for the normal individual to have access, right? Like if we tomorrow, all of these institutions or apps that sort of allowed access to a lot of individuals who perhaps don't have the ability right now to set up their own node and directly, you know, communicate with the Bitcoin network, went away, a lot of people would lose access to an asset that helps them tremendously, right? So I'm curious what you guys would say to Bitcoiners who are like, we should totally reject, as a business, just don't do it, right? Don't adhere to those regulations. Tell the government to go kick rocks. I struggle with it because I do personally think that it's insane that we're held hostage to a tyrannical government. But what would you say to those individuals? You know, what is the comeback for that? Because I think it's a valid concern, it's a valid statement, but it's also, is it realistic? And what would your response be to those people?
I mean, I have said this many times before, but like, the only way to change something is to infiltrate it and then burn it down. And that's what I'm actively seeking to do at Thunder. And I've always been passionate about like not totally trashing on custodial solutions because it's like a wonderful gateway. For instance, most of our users, their first wallet is Wallet of Satoshi. But then they like transition to Breeze and then they learn about custodianship and they get hard wallets and there's this whole kind of, I don't know, life, or I don't know, a timeline for these like little new Bitcoiners, and it's really beautiful. So I am just kind of like, you know, these are the laws. I have to follow them. I'm going to work every day to change them. But if I totally go against them, I will probably end up in jail and make the entire industry look bad. So I totally agree. Like for instance, you know, we allowed anon accounts for our games for a very, very long time. We've had to disable that actually because people cheat so much with the anon accounts, but we are like actively working to like use LN URL auth for people to log in. So I think it's just like slowly getting to that point where you can totally like put a middle finger up to it all. So you just have to work to get there. That's kind of our philosophy at Thunder anyways.
I would give, I guess, one brief philosophical answer to this question, one practical. I think a way to think about this is a little bit, you need to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. The greatest thing about Bitcoin is that it does not rely on government. Government doesn't have any control, doesn't need to follow any laws. It's really the only thing you can point to in crypto where code is laws is very literally true, right? And not your keys, not your coins. It is a totally self-contained system that doesn't suffer from the Oracle problem because everything in Bitcoin is endogenous to Bitcoin. That's not true of almost anything else we're talking about when doing a Bitcoin company, right? The whole point of doing a company, creating this legal entity, is that you want protection from the courts, and the courts are the government. And if you want the government to protect your business interests, you want the benefits the government is giving, you do have to play by their rules, and we can work to change those rules, and we should work to change those rules. But you're availing yourself of a system that does rely on a different ethos than the Bitcoin network itself does. And so even if you're working with Bitcoin, the company part of Bitcoin company is something separate. Two very quick pieces of practical advice on this. Broadly speaking, and I can't emphasize enough that this is not legal advice, but broadly speaking, there is less regulatory headache when you are doing non-custodial stuff, right? When you control other people's funds, you're much more likely to be a money transmitter, and so if you're building something and you can build it in a non-custodial way, that will make your life easier from a regulatory perspective. And then the other thing is never put yourself in a position where you're knowingly involved in criminal activity, right? You don't want to be Charlie Shrem, right? Like, you know, it's just not a good situation. If you have reason to think that, you know, funds are flowing through your business towards criminal needs, like that is the single biggest red flag where you can create personal criminal liability for yourself. And so if you find yourself in that situation, absolutely go talk to a lawyer. And, you know, there's almost always a way out where someone like myself can help you, but that is one area I would not fuck with.
Just to echo Zach, I think one of the one of the things that people conflate, founders conflate, is the freedom of Bitcoin with the legal entity that you're operating, the jurisdiction that you're operating it in. I mean, that's an unfortunate reality for you. So if you want to break the laws of your LLC in the US, you're going to be held accountable to that sooner or later. So what's your option if you absolutely hate KYC and AML, regulatory arbitrage? Go and set up a legal entity in a jurisdiction where that isn't a problem. Well, good luck with that. I mean, if you do succeed in doing it, let me know. I'd love to know where you went. Avoiding this stuff is going to be really difficult and will probably distract you from actually the core business and the reason why you wanted to create this in the first place. I wholeheartedly agree with become successful and lobby the hell out of your government to change the law. Because, I mean, from my perspective, AML, in principle, yeah, who wants to be involved in funding terrorism? Who wants to be funding scam addresses, like sending Bitcoin to a known wallet that's being used for scamming? Like, no one actually wants to do that, but the reality is the way the banks have abused it. So your traditional financial sector will, simply for buying Bitcoin, shut your account down because of some idiot compliance officer who thinks the bank will lose their license if they don't do that, even though you've been with the bank for 20 years. That was me in HSBC. So now I've had to open up multiple bank accounts. So one of the things I'd like to do is, if we have a new bank, a new crypto-native bank, we define the risk appetite for AML. And maybe we can make better decisions than HSBC, who actively engage in money laundering all the time and get fined for it, gets to walk away. So maybe, actually doing AML KYC properly, actually safeguarding any kind of personally identifiable information that's shared with us. I don't want to sell that information. I'm the CTO of the company. If I find out that we are planning to change our policy to sell personally identifiable information, I'm going to blow the whistle. So you can act to actually embody the laws and execute them, take the moral high ground, do it properly.
Well, this is an interesting segue into something else. Zack doesn't know I was going to bring this up. How do we lobby? How do we teach these lawmakers what Bitcoin is, what is it not, and how to regulate it properly, which is something I struggle with. I appreciate institutions like the Bitcoin Policy Institute, who's out there trying to educate lawmakers. I have a hard time playing nice with lawmakers sometimes. So I very much appreciate those who are. So I was just going to sort of jump into how do we educate them? How do we differentiate between the crypto market? How do we sort of help them at least make it less complicated for Bitcoin companies? I was wondering if you could sort of touch on that.
Yeah, I think the place I would start there is getting more input from the Bitcoin industry, right? People like Gunjay, people like Noah. What's on your wish list? What do we want in the regulations, right? Because Andreessen Horowitz knows what they want in regulations. They want to legalize ICOs. And we've seen the 2 draft comprehensive crypto legislation bills. Some of it has actually very useful stuff for Bitcoin, reclassifying block rewards as non-taxable income until it's sold. That would be great. Getting some clarity around KYC, AML stuff is helpful. But really, mostly it's focused on this question of how do we, fix this problem where everything in crypto looks like under a certain security. And the best thing we can do in order to have a voice is decide what we want that voice to say. So I guess I would turn that back on the industry participants, and you guys give me your marching orders, and then we'll make sure that legislators hear that. And the last thing I say here is that in general, legislators are going to be more receptive than regulators. If you look, if we take a look at the crypto space more broadly, we've got these sort of sweeping bills, the buyer bill and the limits children bills, and those are very friendly to the industry, right? Those are, perhaps in some ways too friendly to the industry. And then you look at the regulatory agencies, you look at the SEC and the CFTC, FinCEN, those are the institutions that are really coming harder at us. So I wouldn't see lawmakers as the enemy. We do need to educate them, but we also need to have very clear asks, and I think that's the thing that goes unappreciated.
That's a really good point. So is there something to be said about Bitcoin companies? Maybe what would that look like? What would those steps look like?
Yes, I mean that is something that we would 100% love to do. I know, for instance, we have there's a Telegram group, messaging group for all like the Lightning network, like people who are founding businesses on, on the Lightning network. And right now it's like, let's just get set up right now and like figure out like, how to operate. But I do think like that's a part of maturing. Like we have to mature to a point where, we are banding together and, helping make policy. And, I think it's just still so nascent that we haven't got there yet, but I think it's really important. So yeah, we're 100% on board.
Yeah, and so I think strength in numbers, right? And it would be useful to have the likes of the larger exchanges who've really made the most money out of crypto right now to potentially fund the creation and organisation of the lobby. But we would definitely participate.
Perfect. I'm going to, I know Zack's up there. Kyle.
I do have a question.
You do? Can I take a question, Brian? Is that allowed?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Sorry, I guess it's actually less of a question, more semi-statement, but like, was it also useful possibly to like,
Is it useful at all to potentially get, like, the idea of educating the people in positions of power? Touching on what Hus has said a couple of times, there's a very large network of Bitcoiners that are passionate about what we're doing, and I think there's a strong opportunity, especially starting at like a hyper-localized level, to start looking at running where it makes sense, because it's probably easier to get somebody who understands Bitcoin voted in than it is to educate somebody who's already in and doesn't understand it. So I think that might be useful, and I'd be curious to hear somebody's thoughts on that.
Do you guys have thoughts on if we just gotta wait this out for a Bitcoiner to get into that role, or if there's luck in educating those that are already there?
Whoever wants to sacrifice themselves to that level, like I will 100% support, because like I personally could never go through that misery. So, but it's an idea that I love. I mean, that is one of the things. It's like, why are these lawmakers? I mean, there are some people who are really trying, but most of them, it's like this whole industry is growing. There's this big boom. It's like your imperative as a lawmaker and as a public servant in this country to learn, to speak to the companies that are building, to speak to the people who are following the rules and build a new framework for them to operate in more freely. But they don't, yet we pay taxes and we pay their salaries, we pay them to like fly all over the world. Like, I can't, like I just can't, obviously. But I'll get there, I will get there, I will play nice, I promise. But yeah, I think that's a great idea.
There was a comment made. I went to, I'm outside of DC now, and so I went to an event, and the idea was to educate staffers, right? And a comment that was made there by one of the fellows actually was that the current individuals in a lot of these roles are just old and they don't care. That they won't be here in 20 years, so they don't really care about what's going to happen in 20 years. And so that's why it's really important on a local level to sort of start educating them. Maybe staffers don't feel important, or maybe those like local individuals who are getting into politics don't feel important. But if we start educating there, then eventually they're going to be influential. And maybe it only takes 5 years, right? Like maybe it's not 20 years. But there is something to be said about like, wow, okay, what is the incentive for the individuals in office to make these changes? And is there, and how do we convince them? I see your hand up again, but yeah.
yeah, well, I think to Des's point, the idea that like they're going to come find us.
What's the incentive for these people to come find us so that they can hear about the changes that we want to see made? I think we're going to have to take a very active approach to get in contact with these people. Like some kind of thing like Zack was just talking about, like put together like a Bitcoin Policy Institute is a great start. I think what they're doing is really important work, but I think Bitcoin companies beyond the Bitcoin Policy Institute getting together and actively going out to create that incentive is probably the only way.
We've got about 10 minutes left. I do want to leave some time for each panelist to do closing remarks. But I was curious if there's anybody in the audience that had a question. Perhaps you're building a Bitcoin company, or just anything that came up. Feel free to raise your hand. If not, we'll kind of move on. Let's see any hands raised. Oh, you're in the front.
So I have a question about lobbyists. how much money are we going to need to pour into lobbying to actually be effective? Because we know about big tobacco lobbyists, we know about big bank lobbyists. They're incredibly effective because there are a ton of lawyers behind them, and a ton of money behind them. So how effective is it to just pour more money into lobbyists when there are going to be counter lobbyists going against the lobbying you're doing? Is it going to be more, and it sounds like I'm attacking what you do, but I'm not. Is it better to just say, okay, you can do your lobbying here, but the best approach is to do a bottoms-up approach, sort of like what my man back here was saying, and try to do Bitcoin Beach, or try to do, that Africa Bitcoin approach?
Can I take that? I totally agree. It has to be bottom up, not top down. Now there are, for example, like Don't Stone Me, Ripple is leading, let's say, in some aspect of lobbying for the whole crypto sector. What we should be doing as Bitcoiners is bottom up. Essentially, representatives need to understand that they're going to lose votes. That's all. That's the message. Well, they're going to gain votes. You don't have to pay lobbyists. You can just. All we have to do is make it very clear to them in every state and wherever you are that you're going to lose a ton of votes if you go against us. It's as simple as that. That doesn't cost money, it costs time. And I think we have time.
I think we should do both. There's no Bitcoin company. We don't need to have one official position. There are Bitcoiners on every part of the political spectrum. Let's do bottom up and top down. And I do think that one area that really is important for lobbyists is the proof of work energy issue in particular. That is the clearest example of where our interests diverge from the rest of crypto, and we need someone to explain the real impact that proof of work mining has on the energy grid, on the environment, and not let whatever narrative is most fashionable with the Ripple executives be the party line.
Especially because it seems like, I feel like sometimes in the Bitcoin community we're almost reactionary, rather than sort of taking those steps, just because there is no one Bitcoin community, right? But now you have sort of these centralized efforts to bash proof of work. You have these entities trying to almost regulate Bitcoin to give themselves a break. So maybe, hey, I made a joke, which I guess is not my joke anymore, but I made a joke a few years ago that like decentralized doesn't have to be disorganized. And just because you organize doesn't mean you now have a centralized authority making decisions, right? But I think something that I've really sort of taken away from this panel specifically is that, yeah, maybe there's something to be said about if you're starting a Bitcoin company, if you're out there and you're interested, start networking with other people creating companies, like get together, more power in numbers, right? And start organizing. And I know there's a decent amount of groups that have popped up, like the Bitcoin Policy Institute, that are out there trying to work, trying to educate. Maybe find one and see if they're doing what you actually appreciate, right? And contribute and support, show up to their events, those sorts of things. So I think there's definitely something he said with that. I know we've only got a few more minutes, so I wanted to go through and let you guys each have kind of closing remarks, whether that just be what you're working on, what you want to draw attention to, or even, advice going out of how do we make this better going forward.
I would say I do want to end on echoing some of the other comments on working bottom up. I think these lawmakers, they work for their constituents, but oftentimes people just go with the fun and what's in the news. So it's also kind of our job to educate everyone around us, not just lawmakers, because if we're allowed enough voice, they have to listen. I find, a really great way to do that is through mobile games that are very fun and easy to understand. But 80% of our users are new to Bitcoin, and most of them are actually older individuals. So, that's a tool that we're using to be like, hey, Bitcoin is not scary. It's not just for criminals. It's easy to use, and it's just beautiful, and people are starting to get it. So I think if we all band together and work to onboard 10 people, there's just be more and more of us, and I think that's how truly we can change lawmakers' minds and eventually hopefully change the world.
So I guess I would want to end with a plea to those of you in the audience. We've got a lot of technical folks here. The first decade or so of Bitcoin was about the asset maturing, and we've, in some ways, mission accomplished there, right? Bitcoin is a global macro asset. Recently, that's not been so fun for all of us, but it's out there, it's on the news all the time. We have some really powerful proofs of concept about how Bitcoin and Lightning and assets on Lightning can really help people around the world both avoid devaluation of their currency, get access to dollars, have financial security for the first time. So we've got a lot of that in place, but the infrastructure still sucks. We really need stuff built around Bitcoin, and everyone on stage, other than myself, is directly working on that, is building the infrastructure, the scaffolding we need to bring Bitcoin to everyone, including the people it's daunting for now. But we need a lot more, and we need more Bitcoin companies. So if you're thinking about maybe starting a Bitcoin company, please do that. And for the first time, probably ever, there are really good resources. You can reach out to accelerators like Pledge Lab, like Wolf. You can reach out to VC funds like Stillmark and 1031 and Trammell and all these folks that are really focused on just supporting Bitcoin companies. But take that step, and now's a great time to do it. I think it'll be great for you, and it'll really be good for the community. So go for it.
Just to keep it very brief, as founders, you need to build your product. I would say avoid regulation, but don't evade it. It's going to catch up with you, so that's it.
Well, one of my favorite sayings in this space is education is empowerment, and I guess that also works in the legal aspect. We have to go out and educate people on how to properly regulate this. With that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this panel. I just want to thank you all for being here. This is really great. Thank everybody for coming. And I just want to thank the TABConf organizers. This conference is amazing. It's all signal. Really appreciate you guys. Thank you.